there's a place west of Odessa that runs north-south, and that's called the Central Basin Platform. It was a big uplift in the Permian Basin. And these Ellenberger formations, where they feel like they would look for this on seismic. They're seeing stuff like this, it wasn't so steeply bedded as that, but they're seeing this, and all of a sudden they get an anomaly on the seismic where they think they can see stuff like this. And you look at all the fractures of this stuff. I mean, this is phenomenal reservoir rock. You've got permeability in all of these fractures. Here, all these fractures are monster permeability. Then you have actually permeability in the rock itself. So this we call it collapsed breccia. So this collapsed breccia in itself is a huge reservoir of rocks. Questions? The plane of that fault is about like that. See that? Yeah. So it's not straight out of the rock. The plane of that fault is actually like this. So this is up front or down front? Down front, right? This was up here. This side is the up front. Okay, let's go a little bit further. See if we find some more weird stuff. Imagine, if you look at that sheet, this anticline is forming like so, and as it's doing so, it's doing this. If you look at those sheets with the colors, so this bed is moving like this, and this bed is coming up, and this bed up here is moving the other way. So it's basically contorting. So if the beds stay the same thickness, they have to be contorted. And this contortion, or these parasitic bowls, are caused by the big anticline forming and these beds sliding over one another. So when they slide over one another, that's what develops those S and Z folds that you see in color there. So basically, what you're looking for is rotate it up and see is an S or a Z. So what happened? This one's better here. This is actually better. This one, a lot of times when these are forming, you get little mini thrust faults. So here, first let me show you this one. This one's a nice one. So, y'all see that? See? So that's it. That's the Z's. Rotate it up to a Z, which way is it pointing? Exactly. So the bigger anticline was doing one of these numbers, the axis is in that direction. That's correct. But this one, when it was forming, basically, when this was coming up and being the floor, you had a fault occur. So a little thrust fault here. So what happens is, I got to look at the far. You can see the fault here, and then it's hard to find because it disappears into an actual bedding plane. So it's kind of hard to see when you get back in here. So when you're back in here, and when it gets back here, it disappears into this bedding plane. It's still there, but you can't see it. So you can't tell, it's actually, the slippage is actually on the bedding plane itself. Okay? Find more weird stuff for me. Kiki. It's a Kiki fold, man. And again, you have the fold here, there's the fault here, running here. Then it disappears into this bedding plane again. You can't see it. That fault does come down through here. You see that fault there. That's just another one of those SZ fold faults. What do we have here? Exactly. So, finer grain, lower energy, kind of a mud. So, where would you expect to find maybe some sand close to shale? What kind of environment? Kind of near the ocean? What do you find like near the ocean? What do you find near the ocean? What kind of geologic or what type of environment do you find? A delta. Exactly. So we've gone from terrestrial to kind of a sand, maybe it's closer, lower energy, delta to somewhat of a marine, shallow marine shale. So if you look over here, there's another type of rock that has a bunch of holes in it. This is very fine grain as well. Got a little bit sandy. If you can see, there's actually, you can see what we call trace fossils here in these holes. So these are, what we're seeing is not the critters, but where the critters burrowed. So the critters are burrowing straight down. So typically what we see in a wave action, in a high energy, like beach type environment, we see critters, you can see they want to go down as opposed to along the floor of the ocean, because the waves are beating on them. So they want to get out of the waves to forage for food and find cover. So the burrows are down, which you can see here. So this would be, so now we've gone from continental to near shore, where we have shales and deltas, where we have shells and sand, to kind of a beach situation. So now we're seeing sea level at this spot raising, right? So we start out continental, and then the seas start coming in, and then we start getting delta type environment, and now we have a beach line or shoreline. And like I said, when you go past, you can see this thing is chock full of holes from the little critters that's burrowed into it millions of years ago. And some of them you can actually see. I saw one a minute ago where you actually can see these are what's called crinoid stems. So you can actually see some of the ribs of one of these crinoid stems in here. And actually, I thought I found one in this rock before, and they're like little tubes. Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, fantastic. This is a great one right here. And the Indians, if you look at it, they're hollow. They should be hollow, yes? Yeah, it's filled with sand, but it's hollow. It has a little hole through it, and the Indians would get them and make beads out of them. So, yeah, you can find, there's another good one. Excellent.
You want me to hold it so you get one? I'll get it eventually. Everyone else take pictures of it.
This is marine shell, but then it was exposed to air. So and if you go back this way, you'll see consecutively evidence of rising and falling sea levels. And through Pennsylvania time, it was big time dominated. If you look at, there's lots of geo articles you can download and you can Google from many of the geologic surveys. And there was one of Indiana, because I did a lot of study in my dissertation looking at coal bed methane deposits in Pennsylvania time. And a lot of the U.S. was covered with seas in Pennsylvania time, and there's a lot of shallow waters where coal was being deposited, not here, but up further north and west. I'm here in Oklahoma, that is. And so you saw these constant rising and falling of sea level. So a lot of what you see in Pennsylvania time is this sand cell sequence of rising seas and then a falling sea. So as you move back through here, you're going to see a cycle. It goes from, let me get my cycles correct. It goes from my hands going first. I think you start out with a shell, then it goes to a silt, and then a sand. Oh yeah, the one thing Neil talked about this rock, because of the fact that the rock would get wet and expand and then dry and shrink. You actually, when it's dry and you can get the drier samples, you can see slicken sides in here. And the slicken sides is for these grains actually expanding and contracting, rubbing against one another. Yeah, I can't remember the exact, but I think it's shale, silt, and then sand. Then it goes shale, silt, sand. And I can't find it in my notes, but I'm pretty positive it's always pretty much in that sequence through Pennsylvania time. Any questions? But this is really important for, you know, you talk about, you know, hydrocarbons, and we're chasing these traps. It's important for you to know the orientation of the beds, how it was deposited, and what environment it was deposited, because the environment it was deposited, like it's a delta, is going to be laterally very discontinuous in a delta. So you're going to have channels, then you're going to have the channel will open up into a delta, so it'll be a splay, and you get far away. And you know, if you move further marine, deeper water from the delta, the sands are going to become finer and finer. It's going to turn into a silt, and eventually a shale. You're going to have that progradiation going from onshore to offshore, where you can expect the sands to change. And this is important for reservoir modeling, that it just doesn't go from reservoir to zero reservoir like that. It's going to be gradation. Whereas in a channel, you do see rapid changes from reservoir to non-reservoir and pinch out. In unconformities, those are traps usually. So you have a angular unconformity. The classic example is at the East Texas Woodbine Field. And the East Texas Woodbine Field, are all of y'all familiar with, who's not familiar with the Woodbine Field? Okay, really? The Woodbine Field is famous. First off, it was probably the first major discovery in the U.S. When I say major, a billion-barrel field. I mean, the rest of them were like spindle top. Spindle tops were like on top of salt domes, and there's a whole bunch of, remember I showed y'all at the very first of school how busted it up it was? Stuff is dipping down to more to the east. Let's get a strike and dip on those. I need a flat spot.
Oh shit, that was a bad throw. That was bad.
Okay, it looks like the strike is 300 degrees, so it's dipping to a little bit, it's 30 degrees perpendicular to 302, so it's almost, this is dipping more to the south. So this is not, the prevalent dip in the area is to the northeast, where this is actually dipping in the opposite direction. This is actually dipping pretty much, it'd be southwest, I guess. No, southeast.
It's inclined. Or an S curve.
So yeah, you can see it's actually dipping in. I mean, you can see a small little distortion up there, but basically it's dipping in that direction here. And you can see the beds there, they're dipping, and over there. Basically that line, that cutaway there, is about what it is. So basically this rock, the way we measure thermal maturity is what they call vitrinite reflectance. And vitrinite reflectance is kind of how shiny it is. The more shiny, the more thermal mature it is. And so you'll hear a lot of geologists, when they're looking at shale, looking at not only TOC, but they're looking at vitrinite reflection. So TOC, is there enough carbon material in here to actually create the oil and gas? And then secondly, has it been cooked enough? And so the vitrinite reflectance is a measure of how much it's been cooked. So the higher the vitrinite reflectance, the more shinier. I think it's parts of O because it's actually reflection under this like refined oil. So they shine a light on it and you see how it reflects in this pool of oil. And I can't remember the type of oil they use, but it's obviously a standard. And then they actually measure that reflectance or how shiny it is in that device. So actually, you know what's cool here is this stuff is actually productive to the north. I mean, Continental has like like I said yesterday, 900,000 acres in this stuff. And where it is much more thermally mature to the north. And they actually can measure where these green marks or spray paint on the rock is not graffiti. It's actually where geologists have come out here and measured section. So the section you can see, it's all tilted. So you got to measure perpendicular because you want the true section thickness. So if I'm measuring section, I'm going like this, then it's going to be greatly exaggerated. Oh, excuse me, it's going to be thin. No, it's going to be exaggerated because it's going to be. If I stand this bed up vertical, then I'm going across and I'm getting the true thickness of a bed, as opposed to if it's tilted like this, I'm going to get an exaggerated thickness. So they actually measure the thickness and they describe it and they go with a gamma ray type device. So they're measuring. Most of you, hopefully, have had something about gamma ray. Bateman talks a little bit about it in Case-Toe logging, and those of you who have had Bateman's class know what a gamma ray is. Gamma ray measures the natural radioactivity of a rock, and shales are more radioactive than sand. They have more radioactive materials in it, and because of that, they all have this characteristic signature. So it's like fitting a piece of puzzle together. So they actually take an oscillometer, I believe it's what they call it, and they actually record the gamma ray down this rock, and then they actually can compare it with wells they drill 20 miles from here. And so they can say, okay, this is what it looks like, so I'm right here in the section, and they can come here and actually study it. And they can see, you know, how this stuff is changing with depth. I mean, you can see it here, the color's changing. Now, some of it is just due to some amount of oxidation. Like, if you knock this away, you can see that it's not rusty color underneath it. But there is still some color change to it. So it is very discontinuous. So let's walk around there and go up here. You might notice these boulders they found actually within the rock. And you can see these little nodules in the rock. Those are called phosphate nodules. And actually they're very, very radioactive. And if we go up here, we can see some. So if you young men want to be sterile, you can put one in your pocket. Yes.
What?
Well, strike.
I don't want to be sterile.
Well, the strike is 302. So 302 is northwest. So if it's northwest, perpendicular to northwest is southwest. So they'd be dipping southwest. So all this stuff was preserved, and that's why it's so rich in TLC. Another thing it's so rich, there's so much of it, is that you can barely see here after Bevel one in the bus. You can find, when we come back, we're going to come back along top, and we're going to look for tar balls. And actually there were tar balls. If you go to Santa Barbara, California, I mean, you see tar balls on the beach all the time there. And that's because it's very organic rock close by. And so I think this is a tar ball. If it is, it's not a very good one. There's one over here, but usually they'll be more circular. And I have one like that. It's on the bus. I meant to bring it. But you'll see it on a rock like this. It'll be circular like this. It'll be a dark brown to black color. And those are actually tar balls that came up on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, this stuff was actually producing oil almost from the get-go, but it just never really got thermally mature to produce much of it. So if you look on, if any of you brought the sheets on, and we already know that in this area the dip is predominantly north to some degree, and here we have beds dipping to the southwest. So we know we have some activity going on here. We know we have a pop-up now, so we got a lot of movement. So this is probably part of an anticline And if you look at that handout I gave you, it shows you where fractures happen on a structure. Who has that? Not that one. I think it's that one. Yeah. Yeah, that one. If you look at this sheet here, you can see where fractures basically occur. So we have the very top of the anticline. That's easy to see because we're bending it at the top. So you have this breakage along the strike at the top of these anticlines. And then along the edge of these anticlines, we have these conjugate faults on these shear joints. And that's what we're seeing here, guys. If you'll look at this, I'll let you come up individually and maybe look at it. But look at where the direction of this anticline is going, and look at these conjugate faults. Now, one thing you'll see is these fractures, I just said fault. I mean, these fractures, conjugate fractures, look, is there an orientation to them? Is there a major and a minor orientation to these? Somebody come up here and tell me what the major orientation of these fractures are.
Major ones are horizontal.
Huh? In what direction? Not north, south, east, west. Look at these fractures. Come up close. Somebody come up close and tell me what the... Yeah. You see them? They're about like this at about a 45-degree angle this way. But do you see others?
Yeah.
And which way are they going? Perpendicular to it. Which ones would you say are the dominant fractures? Exactly. The ones that are going this way are dominant, and these are not so dominant. And if you look closely, these fractures terminate, the fractures going this way terminate in the fractures going this way. So these fractures are continuous, where these fractures are not so. In coal bed methane, they form for a different reason, and we call them cleats. And in coal bed methane, we call the dominant fracture is called the face cleat, and the fracture nearly perpendicular to it is called the butt cleat. So in a situation in coal bed methane or in shale, if you're drilling a horizontal well, which direction would you want to drill? Say this was flat. Which direction would you want to drill that well?
Wouldn't you go with small fractures so the big ones could flow?
Exactly. Do I hear another thought? I know y'all didn't hear that. What do you guys think? Which way would you drill the well? If my dominant fractures are in this direction and the minor fractures in this direction, I say minor because they don't go a long way. They terminate in these major fractures this way. So which way do I drill my horizontal?
Normal to the major.
Perpendicular to what? The major fractures. Think about it, guys. In my production class I'm teaching.
Like natural first.
Which direction are you creating you drill the well in a direction to create hydraulic fractures. In what direction with the wellbore? Perpendicular to it. Traverse fractures. Well, Mother Nature has given you these. So you would want to drill perpendicular to the face cleats or your predominant fractures here. And if you look at these fractures, they're all filled with tar, so basic oil. So they're actually all filled with tar or some kind of discolored material, which is probably calcite. Now that creates a problem. If we create these fractures and we have water flow through them at a later time, some of the dangers or problems is that the water will deposit calcite and fill the fracture up, and it becomes non-permeable. So that's sometimes an issue. But what could take care of the calcite potentially?
Acid.
Acid, hydrochloric acid, right? The same thing we talked about in class. So you can see some of these dominant, this one and this one are filled with some type of deposit. It's not open, and then these others are filled with oil. One other thing, how deep do these things go? Somebody come up here and tell me how deep those fractures actually go. Not much. Basically, the width of this layer right here.
Like inch and a half?
Not even that, maybe.
Maybe a centimeter, maybe.
Right here.
Okay, so I broke this off, this one little layer off. And so my fractures only just barely go into it. And this is what what I really want to point out with hydraulic fractures. It doesn't take much of a lithology change to stop a frac from growing. So we're going to see this a lot more at the next stop we go to. But we're going to walk up here, we're going to look at these. Very scratchy. What is that?
Or medium. What's that?
Lime. It's a limestone. Okay, so this is that Ken Blade limestone that we're looking just at not far down the street when we went across. When we started out, we had the Pennsylvania College Ranch conglomerate. We went across a big asphalt, up big master uphill, and went from Pennsylvania to Ortivicia to Kennesaw. So what else do you see? Any faults here? What do we see? See that?
Come on, don't let him.
Where was this?
Oh, man.
Up higher. Huh? Down here, right? Okay, is that an S or a Z fold?
Let's see him get back up.
S fold, that's right. Yeah. So if it's an S fold, where's the top of the anticline? Exactly. We've got a big anticline, we've got S's on the right, and Z's on the left. Intuitively know that because we're still on the south end of the big Arbuckle anticline. So if we look across the street, is that an S or a Z fold?
That's a Z.
It's a Z fold, right? Should be a Z fold, because now we know that the anticline is that way. And Z folds are on this side, S on this side. So when we look across the street, it's a Z fold. This way, it's an S fold. So what we have here is this is very similar to Ventura anticline if you look at it. It's in the LA Basin. So what you have are these faults that occur when this feature is growing like so, and you get those thrusts that happen when this is pulling apart. And what would happen, imagine this was magnified thousands of times, and this was a sealing shale, then there's a reservoir right there, little pop-up reservoir. Then over here, we have another anticline. This would be another reservoir over here. This is how complex some of these structures can be. And when you think about the Gulf Coast and salt line, very complex dust structure. But this is all very large. Think of this magnified again 1,000 times. If this was one big anticline, you would have not only traps in this anticline, but you would also have traps on this anticline as well, trapped up against this fault here. Questions? So then this is the type of features we're looking at in conventional reservoirs, okay? Conventional. When we're talking about trap. When we talk about unconventional, basically unconventional reservoirs do not have traps. You're not really looking. The only thing you might be looking for as far as structure is for increased amount of fracturing, like we saw in the last stop. The only thing structure has to do with anything is increasing reservoir fractures. Structure of conventional reservoirs is important because you've got to have a trap.